Today I'm going to talk about the battery life on your Olympus camera. Okay, so basically out of the factory, straight from Olympus, the camera is pretty much optimized for maximum battery life. There are some settings we can change that will let us extend that battery life to some extent. But it's really, you're talking about making compromises in your shooting style or features of the camera. So to give you an example, like if you're a sports action shooter and you're taking pictures at high speed, continuous shutter, mechanical shutter, continuous autofocus, image stabilization, and you got a big honking like 300mm f4 lens with image stabilization built into that. And you're chewing through memory cards, you're using UHS-2 high-speed shooting RAW plus JPEG, yeah, you're going to burn through the battery pretty quickly. Versus, somebody doing maybe time lapses and star trails or long exposure, the camera's going to be able to stay on much longer. So between those two extremes, really, there's everything else, right? Taking pictures at the birthday party, going out to the park, some landscape shooting, etc. And there are settings we can change that will help us to extend the battery life in those kinds of situations. But you're going to be making compromises somewhere, right? For example, one of the settings that is available that can help extend battery life is, auto dimming the display after a set amount of time, maybe 8 seconds, maybe 15 seconds, whatever. And it's not something that I like to use because a lot of times I'm on a tripod and I'm trying to compose the picture and I'm looking at the back of the screen for the exposure, and it just takes me more than 8 seconds. And if the screen goes dim, it's really annoying that I have to tap something, potentially changing the focus point or one of the settings to wake the screen back up. So that's one compromise or setting that I'm not willing to make because it would affect my shooting style. And then there's other ones, continuous autofocus, single point autofocus, etc. So let's talk about really what are the main draws of power on the battery in your camera. Well, obviously it's the live view and the electronic viewfinder. Those two things really draw the most power because they're virtually almost always on. And then the next thing would be the lenses themselves. If you have an autofocus lens, the autofocus motor is going to draw power. The aperture motor is going to draw power. If it has image stabilization built in, that's going to draw power. And even more so if it's a power zoom lens like the kit lens that's on my EM10, that's going to draw power for the power zoom lens motor. It draws power every time you turn the camera on and off or every time it goes to sleep because this is the pancake version, so the lens collapses or expands when it's turning on and off and going in and out of sleep mode. So then there's one other thing. The third thing really is the internal mechanisms in the camera, the shutter itself, the mechanical shutter itself, and then the in-body stabilization to a much lesser degree. So there's a lot of things in the camera that draw power. Such as, using an art filter will draw more power than just, say, shooting in a natural color profile because it has to go through the processor and create that image and display it on the back of the screen to a very, very small extent. So there's a million little settings like that can be changed that I'm not going to get into because I think out of 1,000 pictures it might give you, 2 or 3 more shots. So they're almost irrelevant and not measurable, but in theory, yeah, these things do draw more power. So let's go ahead and go into the menu system, and first I want to talk about the battery icon itself. I've touched on this on other videos, so if you've seen those, this kind of overlaps a little bit, but I did discover something a little new. I don't know how I missed this, but the battery icon, if you notice, and let me turn on the Pen F here. You'll notice right now the battery's, full 3 bars, and it comes on. But shortly thereafter, the battery icon disappears. And there's no way to make it stay on that I know of unless you go into a different type of view. Okay, and those views are the Super Control Panel view and then also in your EVF, okay? So let's go ahead into the menu, and I'm going to show you how to have the battery icon stay on all the time. Actually, there's one other mode that the battery icon stays on all the time, and that's in movie mode. So like right now I have the Pen F set to movie mode, and that battery icon just stays on. But if I go into, you know, aperture priority or any of the other shooting modes, you'll notice the battery icon disappears, and it won't come back on until the battery's, you know, already been drained. And then it may show you 1 or 2 bars, it may be flashing red. But you know, a lot of you ask me, how do you make this stay on? So let me show you that. Basically, the first thing you need to do, let me see, I've done a factory reset on this, is you go into the display menu, and let's go down to, I'm sorry, not the display, the EVF menu, built-in EVF menu. And you want to make sure the EVF auto switch is set to on, and by default it is on. Okay, and now that the EVF auto switch is on, all you have to do is push the EVF button, and there's a little like EVF icon on the button. It's on the back of the Pen F here as function 2, and then on the EM10 it's over here on the side of the viewfinder. But you just push that button, and now you go into Super Control Panel mode, and you'll notice that the icon for the battery has come on. So that's pretty much the only way to keep the battery icon on the back of the screen all the time. And let me go ahead and turn this off. The other way is actually in the electronic viewfinder inside the camera. So if you have an electronic viewfinder like this EM10 or Pen F, all you need to do there is change the built-in EVF style. Now style 1 shows the EVF, okay? I'm sorry, style 1 does show the battery icon, and it's going to be in the bottom left corner. Style 2, style 3 does not show the battery icon until the battery's almost drained. So it's very similar to just the back of the live view screen. And then style 2 and style 1, both of these, if you look in the bottom left when you're looking in the EVF, you will see the battery icon on all the time. So those are the only ways to really see the battery icon all the time, is either through the EVF in style 1, 2, or if you're working in Super Control Panel mode. Okay, so there's another setting in the camera, and this is not really a way to keep the battery icon on, but it does cause the battery icon to come on sooner as the battery starts to drain. And that's this setting down here, I believe in the utility menu. Yeah, warning level. Okay, the default warning level is 0. And that's roughly when the battery gets down to about 60%. And it's going to be different battery to battery based on the age of the battery, the brand of the battery, if you're using Olympus. I mean, so it's not terribly reliable or precise. But if you want the battery warning to come on sooner, you can crank this up to 2. So now the battery icon will show up sooner, and what I notice is when I have this on 2, the battery icon will have 2 bars, and I've gone about, you know, halfway through the battery life, relatively speaking, because 60% battery life is actually probably you're almost out, believe it or not. So I guess it depends on how you look at it. 60% is not really 60%. But anyway, if I turn this to -2, then the battery icon won't come on until it's flashing red and you're almost out, and you probably only got 10 or 20 shots left, if that. So I just leave it to 0 because I haven't found a way, you know, well, basically the precision is not there for this to really be reliable. But you can play with it with your camera and your batteries and see if it helps you, you know, get a feel for when the battery's about to go out. Okay, and that's pretty much it in terms of the battery icon. So let's go into some of the settings that can help us extend the battery life, but in exchange, you know, we're going to compromise some functionality. Okay, so let's see. Shooting menu 1, there's nothing. Shooting menu 2, there's really nothing there either. Playback menu, the only thing here is the connection to smartphone. And this is just sort of a rule of thumb, is you know, if you're using Wi-Fi, you're going to get less battery life, but it's not too bad. It doesn't really have that much impact as long as you're nearby the camera with your cell phone. If you're really far away, you know, 20-30 feet, for example, it's going to use more battery than if you're standing sort of right next to the camera. So just be aware of that. And that's basically from my experience with Wi-Fi on laptops. You know, if the signal is weak, the Wi-Fi is working harder, generating more heat, and thereby using more battery. So I don't see why it would be any different in a camera, but you know, that's a very minor thing, right? Okay, so let's go to the next menu. Now, autofocus, manual focus menu, really, you know, we can look at the autofocus modes, and single point autofocus is, you know, with an autofocus lens is probably your best way to save battery life is shooting in this mode, because if you were to switch this to continuous autofocus, then the lens is constantly trying to focus wherever you're pointing it, as long as you half press the shutter. And you know, that's going to use more battery because, like I said, the motors in the lens use a lot of power depending on the size of the lens too, right? This little 12mm lens probably doesn't use as much power as, say, the 300mm lens, because the motors have to be bigger and faster. Okay, so just shoot in single point, you know, for the most part. And the same thing applies to movie mode if you want to be in continuous or single point. Generally, I just leave it in continuous autofocus because I'm, you know, hand holding the camera for video. For this video that I'm making now, I'm using single point autofocus, so the camera's not constantly searching for focus while it's recording, thereby saving battery life. Okay, and let's see if there's anything else in here. Okay, the AF Illuminator is on by default. I like to turn this off because all that is it's like this little light here or over here that comes on when the lighting is low, and it wants to help the camera to help focus it by illuminating whatever the subject is. And generally, if you're using a lens, you know, the lenses I use always have a hood on them, or they're a little bigger, and it's blocking that light anyway, so I just leave that off for the most part. Okay, and then let's see. Really nothing in here. Okay, the continuous shutter. So if you change this from 10 frames per second to, say, 5 frames per second, you're going to use less battery because you're taking less pictures, less use of the mechanical shutter. But you know, you'll save battery life if you shoot in electronic shutter only, if that works for you. Okay, let's see, image stabilizer. You know, obviously, like I said, for this little 12mm lens, the image stabilizer doesn't have to work too hard. You know, so it's not going to use much battery life at all, so I can just leave it on. But if I'm using, say, 600mm lens, like I did, I was taking a picture of the moon, that image stabilizer, my God, that thing was just bouncing off every corner of the camera inside. So it was definitely using more battery life than my 12mm. So, you know, you can turn that off to try to save battery life. If you're just trying to squeeze every little ounce out, that's another setting you can change. Okay. And then finally, there's this release lag time. Actually, the default is normal, and you can put this in short. And this in and of itself does not really save you any battery life that you can measure. All it does is, you know, when you push the shutter, does it take the picture faster or slower, right? And when you set the release lag time to short, like a sports action shooter probably would, the camera has to scan the shutter button a little more often to see if it's being pushed or not, so that it will be able to release the shutter more quickly. And that by itself, probably, you know, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. But when you put this in short mode, what it does do is disable the quick sleep time mode. So we'll come to that a little bit later. The quick sleep time is probably the best way to save or extend the battery life of everything else we're doing here. So I'm going to leave this in normal for now, and then I'll come back to this when we get to the quick sleep time. Okay, now in the display menu, I did talk about, I think let's see. Backlight LCD hold. You know, I mentioned, I think earlier, about how I don't like the screen to just automatically dim after 8 seconds. So I leave this on hold. But if you set it to 8 seconds, the screen will dim, thereby saving a little bit of battery life. But it's very minor. Okay, the next setting is the sleep. This is not the quick sleep time setting. This is just the sleep. So if I don't touch the camera for a minute, it's just going to go to sleep. And when the camera goes to sleep, it's still using a little bit of power. I guess to monitor the buttons to see if you're pushing anything to turn it back on. There may be some other things running kind of at a very low power, but sleep mode is not off, okay? And that's what this next line item is for. Auto power off. And you can set this to as little as 5 minutes. I typically have 1 hour. Sometimes I just leave it on 4 hours. But after, like the way I have it now, after 1 hour, the camera will completely shut off, and the only way to turn it back on is by physically, you know, turning it off and back on with the power switch. So, you know, 1 hour is a good time frame, but, you know, think about how you shoot. You know, when I'm going for long walks, you know, 1 hour is too soon, because sometimes I might be walking for a little over an hour, then I'll see something I want to take a picture of, and then I have to turn the camera off and on again. So, you know, but that's the difference between sleeping and auto power off, okay? And then you can turn off the internal speaker so that it doesn't beep every time, you know, you acquire autofocus. But that's very minor. It's probably not measurable in terms of battery life. Okay, and then let's see. Don't think there's anything in here. Movie mode. Okay, built-in EVF. Okay, so we talked about the EVF style 1 and 2. And the EVF auto switch, okay. But EVF adjust, you know, you can turn auto luminance on and off, so it just automatically brightens or darkens. I had it set to off, but the default, I believe, is on. And then you can also adjust, now the screen blanked out because it switched to the EVF, but when you look inside the EVF, you'll see little bars that will brighten or dim the electronic viewfinder. So setting that to the dimmest level will, in theory, save a little more battery life. But I think in practice, this really doesn't make much difference. Okay, let's see, what's next? Okay, warning level. Yep, we talked about that. And touchscreen settings. In theory, if you turn touchscreen off, it'll save a little bit of battery as well. But again, I don't think it'd be something you could actually measure. But if you're just trying to squeeze an extra picture or two out of 1,000, you can turn this off. And that's it. So we have to actually go to the setup menu next for anything else, which is the live view screen on the back of the camera. And here's where you can kind of dim or brighten the back of the LCD to try to save a little bit more battery life. So, I mean, these extreme settings, well, I shouldn't call them extreme, but these minor settings like this that don't affect the shutter speed or the image stabilization, or turning the live view on and off in sleep mode, really, these things have very, very little effect. And I'll point you to an article that I found on DP Review, a forum post that I found on DP Review, where the guy actually measured the milliamps coming out of the battery in different modes. And one of the things he mentioned was, you know, going from very dim to very bright really didn't save any battery life. But I'll point to that article down. He did a really nice spreadsheet with all these different modes or different states that the camera's in and how much power it's drawing. Like when it's in burst mode, it's drawing 500 milliamps. When it's just in live view mode, it's drawing 355 milliamps. So it was kind of an interesting read, but excuse me. Okay, so that's that. Whoops, we hit the 1 minute mark on this camera, which reminds me we do need to go into the utility menu down here, menu K, And let's see, was it in here? Yeah. Quick sleep mode, okay, is set to off. Let's turn this on and talk about this for a second, because this is actually, and there's a couple of settings here you'll notice with the right arrow. I can set it to turn the back LCD off in 3 seconds, and I can tell it to go into sleep mode in 5 seconds. Okay, and let's turn that on. And you'll notice that was different than the other sleep mode where we could just like set 1 minute, 30 minutes, 5 minutes, etc. This one goes down to like 2 seconds, I'm sorry, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, for example. But you notice we've been more than 3 seconds, and this camera has not turned the back LCD off, and it has not gone to sleep. And that's because we need to be in super control panel mode that I talked about early on in this video. So if we change it to super control panel mode by hitting the EVF button, you'll notice the LCD went off after about 3 seconds, and the camera is actually going to go to sleep any second now. Actually, it already has. So the camera is now falling asleep after 5 seconds. And then to wake it back up is no problem, but you'll notice in 3 seconds it'll go right back to sleep. But if I'm not in super control panel mode, the quick sleep mode is not active. Okay, it's also not active when we have the release shutter lag mode in the other menu set to short. And I believe that was all the way up here in release. If I turn this to short, release lag time, and then go into super control panel mode, you'll notice that even after 3 seconds, it doesn't go, doesn't turn off the LCD, and it doesn't go into sleep mode. So the release lag time short disables the quick sleep time. But I think, you know, if you're really trying to eke out all day on a camera on a single battery, if you use the quick sleep time mode, that's probably your best approach, because it's turning off the LCD, it's turning off the camera, putting it to sleep very, very quickly. And then, as you know, the camera wakes up pretty quickly from sleep mode. So this is probably the best way to extend the battery life. But there's a couple of tricks to getting to it, right? And understanding why it works sometimes and why it doesn't. But now you know. Okay, so let's turn this back to normal. And like I said, for me, I like the LCD be on because I'm on a tripod, or it takes me a while to compose. So the quick sleep time mode doesn't work for me, or the way that I like to shoot. But it may work for you, you know, particularly like if you're out camping and there's no access to a power supply, and you want the camera to last, you know, as long as possible. This is a great way to extend the battery life. Okay, I think that about sums it up. I'm gonna post a couple of other links, not links, but some images of tips that I saw about, you know, one guy, he likes to turn his camera off, you know, between shots, and I think that's a little bit too extreme and puts a lot of wear and tear on the camera. That's unnecessary, especially that we have this quick sleep time mode built into Olympus now. And then, you know, another one was the record view. Olympus, one of their archives suggested that turn off the record view, which is basically when you take a picture, you know, it'll briefly show that picture you just took on the back of the screen. And turning that off supposedly saves battery life. I don't know if that's still the case, because that was a very old post. But you can try it and see. For me, I just normally have it off or leave it to a half a second. And I really haven't noticed any difference in battery life. But it's just another tip that I found that may or may not be useful. But okay, so that's pretty much it. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate all of the comments and feedback I've been getting. They've been very, very kind. So I thank you for that. And if you'd like to see me make another video on a particular topic or tutorial, just let me know. Just ask me in the comments below. Because the next video I'm going to make is actually going to be on bulb mode, live time, live composite. Because there's a lot of settings in there that are, I think, could be very confusing. And really, they're not that bad. Once I show you, you'll be like, oh, is that all it is? You know, it's actually pretty easy. So I'll show you that in another video. So thank you for that question. I think it was a good one, so we'll do that next. So hit subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.